So, Dwarkesh Patel recently did the community a great service by bringing together the likes of George Hotz and Eliezer Yudkowsky to talk about AI safety, AI alignment, the question of whether AI is going to kill us all or is going to give us everything that we ever wanted. And I absolutely love this, Dwarkesh. Great work. I think these kind of debates, these disputations are exactly the sort of thing that we need, not only because it gives us additional ideas to chew on, but because it gives us these paragons of each side. And so George representing the no, it's not going to kill us, it's going to be great side, and Eliezer, of course, representing the doom and gloom side. So I think what you're going to find is that I trace a kind of third option, which is potentially even more terrifying than what it is we get from either of these guys, but I respect both of them. Now, I will say, I love George. I love his mind. I love the way that it works, what it is that he's doing with, all of the different initiatives that he started, the companies that he started with Comma, with Tiny Corp. And so, it's really, really good stuff. So you owe it yourself to get familiar with this guy and his mind and how he thinks and his work in business and what he's doing. Really good stuff. At the same time, also, Eliezer has some important things to say and some important intuitions that are worth chasing down and worth trying to figure out what's going on. And so that's part of what it is that I want to explore today. And the most important thing that I think that I can say in this position, because I teach philosophy, right? So George is a much better programmer than I am. There's, hands down, there's no question there. And Eliezer obviously knows more about biology than I do. And so I'm not going to be able to speak to either of those disciplines. So what makes anyone think that you should listen to a philosopher in this case? Well, it's because fundamentally this problem and this debate is a philosophical debate. And I have a reason for saying that is not entirely obvious. And it's this. So it's one thing for us to try and forecast in the future and say, okay, what does artificial superintelligence actually look like? What does an advanced AI actually look like? And the path to get there, is there danger in the works? Is there something looming that is potentially going to be an existential threat to humanity? And so this, at least on the surface, seems like a very important question to ask. And I'm sure if Eliezer's actually watching this, he's nodding along. Yes, of course, this is an important question to ask. And he couldn't be more right about this. Right? It is an important question to ask. But at the same time, the way that we formulate that kind of question involves a presumption with respect to the kind of thing that we can know on the basis of how it is that we think right now. And what I have in mind is something like this. So in the debate that these two were having, there was a lot on complexity theory, information theory, advanced, concepts in biology, and whatnot. And at one point, Eliezer even held up a textbook, and it's like, okay, do we even want to go here? This is a difficult enough topic. And that, I think that thought is something, that kind of thinking is what I want to push on here. And that is that it's even possible for us to conceptualize this, that it's even possible for us to be able to extrapolate from what it is that we already know and try and say something intelligent about the future. And so one of Eliezer's intuitions, which I think is very interesting, and it was certainly, based upon a certain amount of success with respect to the protein folding problem, which he saw, 15 years before it happened. But at the same time that it's impressive that he was able to see the end, just couldn't see the timing, I respect that. I respect that intuition. It was based upon a science that was largely established, and it was based upon a series of technologies that were at least already partially, if not completely, there. And that's something where if we already have the right paradigm for the sciences, then it's very easy for us to extend that to extrapolate within the context of essentially normal science. And I'm thinking of this in the Kuhnian sense, so with Thomas Kuhn's work in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions in 1962. So if we are already operating within the right paradigm, then it's just a matter of saying, okay, we know what the search space looks like. We know what the landscape of possibilities looks like. Let's examine that landscape of possibilities and then speak to probabilities, statistics, threats, and that sort of thing. But here's the thing, and this is what I question. Can we know what the landscape of possibilities actually looks like? And that's where I think we run into a serious problem. And so I want to bring this back into a kind of tangible form by referring to a specific example. And here, what I have in mind is something a little closer to home with me rather than, biology and programming and statistics and that sort of thing. Music. So if we think about what it was like to record music and the thought of even trying to record music 150 years ago, 200 years ago, how could people even think about it? How could they think about what the landscape of possibilities was going to look like? Even if they had the foresight to be able to say that it was possible to replicate music and to have some notion of what was going on in terms of sound waves and the way that all these things mix together. And I mean, someone said, for instance, at the very beginning of this, when people were talking about it and saying, okay, I'm going to record, or, in the future we're going to be able to record something like an orchestra that was playing. And the thought was, and someone balked and said, oh, you would need, an entire army of, people doing this. And that was what people thought at the time, that the complexity was such that if you were to scale up what it was that they already knew, then, okay, well, this is going to require, so much more than we currently have capability for. And that was the kind of argument that we started moving towards with the discussion of, petaflops and exaflops and zettaflops. If it is something where we already have the quantity identified, if we already have some notion of what's going on, and our version of knowledge, our version of the paradigm is already the right one or right enough, then maybe we have at least a fighting chance to conceptualize it. But the worry is that we may not even have a fighting chance to conceptualize it. It may be so totally different that we can't even imagine what was going on. And so taking that same debate from those who were trying to figure out, okay, well, maybe you understand something about sound waves. Maybe you understand something about how it is that eventually something like a speaker is going to be able to replicate the sound of an entire orchestra. Even if you grant that, what about digital? Could they possibly have foreseen the paradigm shift that was going to occur with respect to music and the reproduction of music, the modification of music in a digital age dealing with a computer? I mean, arguably, they had no basis whatsoever for understanding this. There was no way that they could possibly understand this because they didn't have a leg to stand on, so to speak, with respect to what that paradigm could possibly be. In other words, they couldn't even consider the possibilities. They had no way of knowing what was going on. And that brings me to my primary concern with the way that these debates typically go and the way that people articulate either, yes, I think AI is going to be wonderful and give us everything that we want, we don't have to worry about it, or no, it's going to kill us all. And I would rather come down on the side of saying I'm skeptical as to whether or not the intuitions that comprise the support for both sides, I'm skeptical as to whether either of them are tenable. Because I'm just not sure that we can know. I'm not sure that we can have any idea what the paradigm is going to be like 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years from now. And I have something even more specific in mind with respect to the AI problem and the question of artificial superintelligence. And that is the portion of the debate that concerned the evolution, how it is that humans have evolved, biological evolutionary pressures, and then also computer, mathematical, evolutionary pressures. And here's the issue. Because there was a lot of talk about, loss functions and gradient descent and the specifics of, whether or not it's chinchilla optimal and all this. That's nice, but I don't want to get involved in, and I don't see any reason to get involved in, the specific technical vocabulary of that paradigm if we don't have any reason to believe that the answer even lies within that paradigm. Because when we're talking about an AI that is capable of rewriting its own code and reconceptualizing what it even means to be an intelligence, then I think we have every reason to believe that even if gradient descent and talking about loss functions makes sense in the present and in the foreseeable future, the problem is it's only what is foreseeable. Once it gets to the point where it can reinvent that sort of thing and reinvent what it means to evolve, what it means to progress, then what you may end up with is a completely different solution, something where we end up with a paradigm shift in terms of how it is that the AI is rewriting its own code, reconceptualizing what intelligence is, and that's just one paradigm shift. What happens if you get another, and then another, and then another? It may be the case that it's not something that we can even imagine, not only now, but even cognize. It may be something that we are not even capable of understanding. And it might require something like an artificial superintelligence to even know what's going on. And so in that case, I think it makes the problem of alignment completely insoluble. It makes it to where we can't possibly know. We can't possibly know if it's going to be good. We can't possibly know if it's going to be bad. Now, with that unknown, I think people naturally have a kind of knee-jerk reaction because as humans, we don't really like the unknown, not terribly comfortable with that sort of thing. The knee-jerk reaction is to say something along the lines of what Eliezer does and say, okay, let's stop, TSMC or the GPU production and, use for AI, et cetera, et cetera. The issue with that, of course, and this is what has been brought up a number of times, is even if you could get a few people, a few nations, most nations, almost all nations, to stop that sort of thing, are you really practically going to be able to stop progress in that?